Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special council meeting. For those viewing our meeting on our web stream or on Eastlink, again, welcome. And for those in attendance, would ask that you please put your phones on silent mode. Before we begin, I do want to remind members of council that Section 17 of the procedural bylaw requires that we have a motion properly moved and seconded prior to any discussion or debate. Also under Section 14, council members are limited to speaking 2 times to each motion for 5 minutes each time, excluding time used for questions to staff prior to the motion being moved. Those wishing to speak 3 times on any motion are required under Section 14 to seek a majority of council prior to being heard. I'll now call this council meeting to order. Changes to the agenda. The changes to the agenda are before you. Are there any further changes? Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Rabbits and seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. Prior to starting the deputations, I would just like to ensure that deputations respect our rules of decorum and refrain from using any offensive language or speaking disrespectfully of any person, be it staff or council members. You will each have 5 minutes to present to council, and afterwards, please do not exit the meeting in case council members have a question for you. Our first deputation is, I believe, Paul, are you, but now I'm confused here. That's you, Rachel Huffman, is that correct? Or are they calling in?
Hi, yes, I just unmuted my line. This is Paul.
Okay, perfect. Paul, if you'd like to begin your We did. If you'd like to go ahead, Paul, you'll have 5 minutes. And then again, if you could stay on the line afterwards.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I've only got 5 minutes, so one of the things, the main point that I'd like to focus on, and for council to take into strong consideration, is the health status of Canadian citizens itself. Because during a pandemic, it would be very wise to focus as much of our energy and time and efforts in every way possible to increase the health status of all Canadians, since the solution to this pandemic and all future pandemics and disease itself, just in general, is health itself. So, for example, we actually have larger problems than even the coronavirus. Every day worldwide, 26,000 people die of cancer. Every single day worldwide, 46,000 people die of heart disease. And year after year after year, we have infectious outbreaks, and over 600,000 people die worldwide of things like pneumonia and the flu. So health itself, I think, should be our number one priority. And if we were to just take a hypothetical situation to make the point, if we were to sanitize a room and put a healthy young man or woman in there, say 30 years old, totally sanitized, and then continue to feed them processed food and keep them up all night so they're not sleeping and healing and regenerating at night, not give them fresh, clean water, add stress to the scenario, it's only a matter of time before they actually start to develop a sickness and come down with, let's say, the flu or any number of health disorders, because their needs for health are not being met. The needs for health itself is what actually unites all Canadians. Every single Canadian needs to actually sleep in order to be healthy, needs to sleep well. This is a health principle. This is what I think we should focus on. Like, obviously more than that, but health itself. Everyone needs clean water. That unites us. I need water just as much as everyone in this council meeting. We all need to eat healthy, clean, whole food. We all need that equally. That unites us again. We also all need to breathe fresh, clean air on a daily basis to maintain our health status. So I think we should be focusing on heavily and as our priority on all the health principles that raise the health status of Canadians. But what I've seen since the pandemic has begun is sort of a backwards approach. For example, we've shut down gyms, and gyms are a place where people go to work out, to exercise, because exercise, again, healthy movement, is something that increases the health status of Canadians and all human beings. And we shut gyms down, but we kept fast food businesses open, and fast food businesses actually contribute to the breakdown or the decrease of the health status of Canadians. And that increases the susceptibility to contracting the coronavirus and developing symptoms from it, and all disease for that matter. We kept liquor stores open and beer stores open, but we shut down the beach and we shut down nature trails where people go to relax and de-stress and connect to nature and breathe fresh air. And so what I'd like to point out to council is that I've submitted also, I think, 9 different health officials from all over the world, high-ranking virologists, immunologists, and doctors of various kinds in my submission that all point out how the breathing principle itself, which is oxygenating our body and exhaling carbon dioxide and any kind of dust particles in the air and things like that, are another health principle. This is a thing that unites all Canadians, again, is breathing oxygen and oxygenating our bodies to support our health status and keep us healthy so that we don't become susceptible to infectious disease. All of these videos that I've submitted point out how wearing a mask actually decreases oxygen, increases the reuptake of CO2, and in effect compromises the immune systems of all who wear it. Some of the videos I've submitted of professionals explaining this show that this is compromised within seconds of wearing a mask. So what I would like to urge council to do is to start putting a large amount of energy and time and effort into increasing the health status of Canadians by focusing on the one thing that actually unites us all, which is health itself. And that is the solution to this pandemic and all future ones. And I guess that's it. That's my 5 minutes.
Thanks very much for your deputation, Paul. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, and through you to the deputation. Hello, Paul. Thank you for your deputation today and providing the links to the various videos and websites that you've shared with us. My question to you, sir, is if you could, would you be able to provide us with just maybe a little bit of your background, what's brought your attention to this issue? I'd be interested to know what you do professionally, just so we can maybe know what your perspective is. I don't know if you're representing a particular industry or just a concerned citizen. So wondering, what background you're coming from and what perspective you're really trying to share with this council.
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, I'm a holistic lifestyle coach, so that's the one thing I focus on helping people achieve is a higher health status. The thing that brought my attention to the pandemic, because I normally just kind of stay out of things like this because I actually have a high level of health, is when I was actually practicing the very principles of health that I teach clients and that I practice in my life to support my own health, such as going on nature trails and going mountain biking, I approached the trail one day and they were shut down. And that actually felt like a very strong infringement on my freedom to actually look after my health. So now suddenly there's some sort of a disease that's going around and I'm not actually allowed to go and do the things that make myself healthy. And that was very concerning for me. So then I started paying attention. And as I've shared just briefly, because I only had 5 minutes, a lot of the decisions being made don't seem to be focused on health itself. And that's, in my opinion, just very dangerous, to be honest. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you, Paul.
Any further questions from councillors? Okay, thanks very much, Paul, for your deputation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the chance to speak. Thank you.
If we could have a mover and seconder that the deputation be received as information. Moved by Councillor Columbus, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next is Shauna Proctor.
Hello.
Hi, Shauna. Welcome. So again, you'll have 5 minutes, and
Hello.
I'll give you a minute heads up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Please take everything I have to say with respect and good intent. I wish you all good health, peace, and love, regardless of your beliefs or your opinions. My name is Shauna Proctor. I worked as an advanced care paramedic in Mississauga during SARS. I worked in emergency medicine over 10 years and was presented the Peel's Chair Award for Paramedic Excellence. I'm highly educated and decorated business and marketing professional. I currently own a business downtown Port Rowan. I will be unable to effectively reopen my business even in phase 3 due to the unsubstantiated draconian measures put in place by our government. I am here today begging you to do the right thing by restoring our human rights and by giving each and every citizen the right to choose what is best for their own body and their own health. We should not have to fight for this. It is written in our Constitution. We should be given a choice as to whether we as free humans wish to participate in an unproven, unsubstantiated social and medical experiment. I will go so far as to state that by forcing an entire population of people to participate in an action with no scientific evidence behind it is in direct violation of the Nuremberg Code. This also applies to the rushed and dangerous vaccines that they plan to push upon us next. The mainstream media is manipulating and fear-mongering. They do not cover all the news in an impartial way. I would like to draw your attention to a filing that has been placed in our Superior Court of Justice against all of our federal and provincial ministers that have contributed to all of the measures put in place by COVID. The statement of claim, there's a 198-page summary. I'm going to read 2 sections from it. One stating that COVID measures taken by both Trudeau and Ford and the retrospective governments at the blind and unquestioned dictates of the World Health Organization constitute a constitutional violation of the abduction of the duty to govern. It is also declared that COVID measures undertaken by Trudeau and his officials violate sections 2, 7, 8, 9, and 15 of our charter, especially the measures of self-isolation, social distancing, the compulsory wearing of masks, and the arbitrary and unjustified closure of businesses. The measures are not scientifically nor medically based or proven to be effective whatsoever. They do pose a physical and psychological harm, and they are extreme and unwarranted and unjustified. If health truly was an issue and masks truly do save lives, I would expect to see Dr. Nyakuri, I hope I pronounced that correctly, jumping up and down and demanding that we wear face masks until his face turns blue. I would not be leaving this decision to a small country council. And no offense to the council, I just don't believe you have the formal medical viral pandemic control training or experience required to make this decision. We have a survival rate of 99.7%. We should be encouraging herd immunity. We know who is at risk. 95% of the population that is at risk is already isolated in nursing homes, prisons, and other institutions. If you mandate masks, people will have a choice anyway. We have a human right to refuse the mask under the exemption that it is difficult to breathe. It is against the law to ask for private medical information, period. So people have an out. They do not have to wear masks. Therefore, mandating of masks only serves one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to divide the people and pit us against each other. My question is, do you want to be the people to divide an already divided and suffering community with pointless and illegal mandates, or do you want to be the council that mandates our citizens to love and respect and value each other? Because you guys are creating a situation that is making COVID 10 times worse by having the community policing each other and ratting each other out and being evil to each other because you're not wearing a mask or because you are wearing a mask. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and hopefully even a handful of you have listened to what I have to say. Namaste.
Thanks very much, Shauna, for your deputation. Are there any questions from councillors? Okay, no questions. Thank you again, Shauna, for joining us. Can I have a
Thank you very much.
A mover and a seconder to receive the deputation as information? That's been moved by Councillor Michelle, seconded by Councillor Huffman. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next deputation is from Rachel Huffman. Hi, Rachel, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to everyone. I'm just going to start with who I am. Obviously, Rachel Huffman, and our family is from Norfolk County, Huffmans. Actually, we've been in Norfolk County since 1884, farming. My mother's family is Arthur's. They've been farming in Norfolk County since 1886. And my uncle, Archie Verspeeten, also a farmer and entrepreneur in Norfolk County, and he donated $1.5 million to, the health center in Delhi and to the community. And so for me and for our family, Norfolk County runs very deep, and we're committed to and want to see it continue to prosper. I wanted to go on and say, like many of us, I started watching the meetings online, and I back in April, and there obviously it was initially because of coronavirus, and but as I was watching, I also started listening to the dire financial situation that Norfolk is facing, and in fact had to sell the Cedarville Pioneer Museum, which my great grandmother Muriel Huffman was the first curator at. So that was a pretty that was hard for us. I mean, it really had a deep meaning. So, but I know obviously no one could have predicted the ramifications and the effects that coronavirus was going to have on the community, on our community. And that's actually what I wanted to speak to is our community. Because I feel like for 5 months, we have been bombarded with outside stats, every day, new cases, new deaths, 3, 4, 5 times a day, 24 hours a day, really. American news, we're looking at Florida, we're listening to Texas. And I don't think that accurately, well, I know, and I'm sure you all know that does not accurately reflect Haldeman or Norfolk. And what it has done is it is traumatizing people, and it is creating a level of fear that causes people to make decisions and do things that maybe aren't based on what's best or fact, and so on. And so I also wanted to put into some perspective, because I thought this was interesting. On February 4th, Dr. Necessary said at the Board of Health meeting that the Canadian medical system is prepared for coronavirus. He went on to say that, in fact, Norfolk County has a higher chance of dying in a car crash, and that our anxiety and our worry about coronavirus should be very low, and that we should really focus more on things that are pertinent to our community, such as crashes. And actually, if you look at the numbers, 110,000, 30 deaths works out to be almost what he quoted. What his number was 20 deaths in 2019 from car crashes, but we all still drive. So then fast forward to March, and obviously this is where I sort of really started paying attention when the Section 22 order was put in place, because it had direct effects on our family, farm, and our community and our neighbors. And the confusion and chaos that surrounded, the Section 22 was extremely stressful and fearful, not knowing whether you're going to have labor to survive, the year. But in May, when we sort of had that conversation, you all had that conversation, something that Dr. Necessary said then is that we must focus. Yes, we're the only county that is doing the Section 22 and the 30-person per bunkhouse, but because we must focus on our county, on our risks and what we should be using to contain local spread and transmission. And that bunkhouses and long-term care were obviously the most highest risk. And so another thing that I noted about that Board of Health meeting is that the chair and the doctor both reminded the board members that day that to speak as a counselor, to speak upon or to bring up the emotional burden that farmers might be feeling, the financial burden that farmers may be going through would be inappropriate. And in fact, it was not their position or place as a Board of Health members to discuss financial or political in a health meeting setting. And hold on, I need a drink here. But now I turn on this week and I see the Board of Health, the doctor in a political meeting advising on a political matter. And so I kind of struggle to see how you can separate the two. If it's not a health matter that's going to be covered in the Board of Health meeting, then why is it being covered here?
Rachel, just as a heads up, you've got 1 minute left to go.
Okay, so I'm going to fast forward. Then I want to talk about this. Expected deaths, actual deaths. Dr. Nefasari said 500 deaths were expected. 30 deaths happened. He said in May, 1,500 deaths were expected. I looked on the health units. It's hard to find. 5 hospitalization. That's 1,000% wrong. That's 1,000% wrong of what was expected. Now you're saying we need to do this. We need to put masks in place. Trust us again. We want to put a bylaw in place. We want to spend more tax dollars we don't have. Your tax dollars to police you, to force businesses, because you as the government don't believe that the community has the ability, respect, or care for one another to wear masks or keep a social distance. You haven't gotten anything right so far. Y'all spend a lot of our money trying to do it though. The Section 22, we still had a farm outbreak. Even though you put implementation in long-term care, we still had deaths. In Norfolk County, the only outbreaks and deaths have occurred in either in both communicable living. Nobody around this table that you're looking at or me lives in a communicable living care center, meaning you're not going to run across somebody with coronavirus at the grocery store. It's not going to happen, not in Norfolk County. And even if it did, your chance of death in Norfolk County, 0.0003. And that's if you live in a nursing home or a bunkhouse. So why are we wanting to spend more money on bylaws and officers? How do you police from Langton to Dunnville? And more millions of tax dollars we don't have. Stop it. Stop spending our money.
Thanks.
If you can prove that masks work, they don't, but it's like an unlimited amount of a piggy bank of taxpayers' dollars. You keep throwing it at public health. For what? You've gotten it wrong every time. 1,500 hospitalizations, 5. Why should we believe you?
Thank you for
Why should we get behind this?
Thank you for your deputation. Any questions from councillors? Okay, no questions from councillors. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Can I have a motion to receive the deputation as information? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Van Passen. All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so I guess we do have a number of communications that were provided to you today. If I could have a motion to receiving them all as information, moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? That's carried. And then prior to moving on to the mask and face covering bylaw, we do have one staff report that's CS 20-20 COVID-19 Pandemic Delegation of Authority. And I have on here that it's Shelley, but is that you, Jason? That's 100%? Okay.
through the mayor to council, as we look at the implications of moving away from the emergency orders of the province and the county's emergency order, we need to make sure that we're still effective on our day-to-day business. One of our finance policies is we're not allowed to expend money unless there's a budgeted item for it. We did not budget. We budgeted very nominal dollars for PPE, for example, and we obviously didn't predict in our budget COVID-19. So the request before you is to allow delegated authority to continue to purchase PPE and other associated costs related to the pandemic, even if we're outside of the state of emergency. Just to give you background with how it works, our teams look at when we're buying PPE, I'll use masks for example, we are continually out in the marketplace receiving quotes, and you have to act on a quote within an hour or two. So if we can get, if we can get N95 masks at $8 a mask and they've been normally trading at $10 a mask, we want to jump on that, and submit our bid and gather it. And because we don't have budget for it, we would essentially be breaking on bylaw. So what this does is allows us to continue to operate as we have been for the last several months under the state of emergency. It would only kick in after the state of emergency, and obviously we would give you immediate disclosure after those key purchases. So that's the intent of that, is just to allow us to keep doing things quickly. We will be storing some supplies for the fall, as we do predict, and we hope we are wrong in our predictions, but we do predict bigger challenges for PPE this fall. And as we roll out more services, there are more and more requirements for PPE. So that's the background to that. I'd be more than happy to accept any questions. It's really just to continue our practice as we move forward, as what we've been doing for the last few months.
Okay, any questions from councillors? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Mr. Burgess. How is our supply presently of PPE? I know that's a pretty broad question because there's a lot of things under the sun, but currently, how is our supply?
We're pretty good on non-surgical masks. We use non-surgical masks for a number of reasons. Surgical masks are like gold at this point in time, same with N95s. Gowns are still very difficult to obtain. Gowns are a global issue. We were paying up to $10 for a disposable gown, which Marlene can give you more. She's the nurse, but at a nursing home, you would walk into a situation with a COVID patient, you'd have a disposable gown on, you treat them, and as soon as you walk out of the room, you have to dispose of it. So it might only last, minutes. So those are our challenges. Right now, we believe we're in good shape with masks. If council passes the bylaw today, that will obviously adjust how our inventory levels that are required for masks, because that will increase. But we are in a comfortable position to move forward with that. So I overall, kind of good on non-surgical masks. Everyone else is having problems with surgical and N95s, and we have a big difficulty with gowns.
Thank you. I wondered, because I'm aware that the community has stepped up and made donations as well. Are we still in a position that should the public have interest to donate gowns or donate other various supplies that they may have, that we're still accepting that? Or I know we've additionally also contributed some PPE supplies to our hospital. Are we still in a relationship where we're transferring materials about?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor. It's a good point. Yes, we are. We will still accept donations. We do, just to be clear, there is some rigorous testing done on anything that does come in. But we are having partnerships with the community. We are testing a pilot project right now. As this council knows, for example, I'll just throw this out as an example. We do have a machine that will sterilize N95 masks and other materials. So we are working with, as a pilot project, a local dental operation because they have trouble getting N95 masks as well. So we're going to start piloting essentially re-sterilizing their mask. So instead of them having to spend $10, they'll have to buy the mask for $10, but instead of disposing it for $1 per mask, they can re-sterilize it, and they can use it up to, I think it's 80 times is what the government regulations are for that machine. So that's an example. We don't get as many community donations at this point in time as we've seen in the past, but we are still in a position to accept that. We are also working with United Way of Norfolk and Haldeman on items of distributing these items, and I'm sure masks will be one of those issues that we'll take a look at for vulnerable populations and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and we still are working with hospital and I would say other medical practitioners. We have some relationships with other medical practitioners. Yeah, everyone's struggling is what I would say, and we're all trying to figure out how best we can help each other.
Councillor Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Mr. Burgess. What was the price of a gown prior to the COVID-19 pandemic?
I was going to turn that over to my colleague, but she gave me a face that she might not know. The temporary gowns were going for like $1 or something like that when we were there, and then they shot all the way up to $10. I think we've sourced some alternative gowns, and I think they were in the $10 or $12 gown range per gown. And I'll hand it over to Marlene.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. And alternate gowns, we did do some testing on some alternate gowns, and I think they came out at about $17 to $19. But they're reusable, so they would need to be laundered, but could be used multiple times. And they were fairly equivalent to the disposable gowns once tested through an external company.
Any further questions? Councillor Columbus.
It's just a kind of a related question. The Port Dover operation where the site's been set up at the arena, is it still intact?
Through the chair to the councillor, it is almost fully decommissioned at this point in time. What we are doing is if anyone drives by it, you'll see a C-can there. We are putting all the materials into the C-can. And we will be ready to redeploy that if it's required. We can set it back up. We are looking at potentially moving the site to the rec center. If there's ice into the Port Dover Arena in the fall, we may. The original plan was to potentially use the rec center as the other site. But what it's designed for at this point in time is we have all the materials on hand. Anything else that we would need, such as portable washroom facilities, can be easily obtained, but we would be ready to set something back up within 48 to 72 hours is how we're planning.
Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move the recommendation on page A27.
Right. Seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? And that's carried. Next is bylaw 2020-66, being a bylaw to impose temporary regulations requiring the wearing of masks or other face coverings within enclosed public spaces. And Jason, I think you were going to present that.
Thank you. Thank you. Through the mayor to council. This is the draft bylaw that staff have proposed. It's patterned after some other bylaws, and it really is, as there's two types of bylaws that are out there. One focuses on the individual and one focuses on the business. What we are focusing on is the business, ensuring that they do three key things. One is to, for those businesses that would be impacted by the bylaw and have public spaces that are enclosed where the public would be accessing, that they have a policy in place, that they develop a policy in place for face coverings, that they train their staff on the policy, and that they conspicuously post signage that masks are required, and that really is the nature of the bylaw. Most of the exemptions in there are standard exemptions from other municipalities that we've looked at. So for example, children under 2 would not be required to wear face masks. There are a number of different organizations that are exempted also in the bylaw. And but it's prepared so that businesses can have some flexibility with how they administer their policies and procedures with this bylaw. And bylaw would not be dealing with the general public. They would be dealing with the business owners to ensure compliance with the bylaw if that's required. But be more than happy to take any questions on it.
Questions from councillors? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Burgess, where does church services, we all received an email, I believe, from a clergyman who was going to have a service. And where does that fall in this bylaw? Is it exempt or is it included?
Church services were not exempted from this bylaw, so they would, they would develop their own policy, and people who would be attendant at a church would fall, the church would fall under this bylaw, and the expectation would be that there would be masks worn at a church service. However, as noted, the church would be responsible for developing how they administer their policies and procedures with regards to being compliant with this. So certain churches may decide to deal with the mask bylaw differently. It wouldn't be consistently necessary from church to church. So they would have some flexibility, but they are required to have a policy in place and train the staff to ensure that it's followed appropriately.
So would the reverend or the pastor of giving the sermon or the mass, would they have to wear a mask at that time?
There's a general exemption if employees are in an employee zone that is protected by a barrier, that they would not have to wear a mask. So it would be possible, frankly, for if they had barriers between where the general public was and where the employee was, that they might not be able, or that they would not be required to wear a mask. And that would be something that they would have to develop on their own to deal with that. So it could depend church to church.
Okay, thank you for that. I got a second question, Madam Mayor. The definition of an underlying medical condition, has that been defined anywhere?
Through the chair to the councillor, that's a good question. I would say that that might be something that we would, that might be something we'd want to add a definition to. What I should say is that, as council knows, we prepared this bylaw in less than a day, and staff would reserve the right to make some amendments over time as we found out as we go through it. Questions such as that, should be probably defined a bit better, and we would want to make those amendments. So I would say, councillor, it's not defined. It's probably something that we may have or could have or chosen to define better.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, and through you. If a business owner has a question about the bylaw, if they're in compliance, who would they call?
Through the chair to the councillor, it would be covered by our bylaw enforcement for general questions.
Thank you. And let someone else go. I'm just trying to.
So Shelley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jason, going back to the places of worship question, you're describing, if someone is at the front or in a sort of a speaker's location in a place of worship. You mentioned that they would have to have some kind of barrier between themselves and perhaps the congregation. Would the barrier be exempt to provide a barrier if the distance from the speaker to the larger group was sufficient?
Thank you through the mayor to the councillor. We believe at the end of the day, the 6 feet of separation is not considered in this bylaw, and in most bylaws it's not considered. So if the concept is, well, if we maintain social distancing, we do not need to wear a mask indoors, that's not contemplated in this. You would still be required to maintain the mask. That's how most of the previous bylaws have been written. It's my understanding that Haldeman is looking at some type of variation to accommodate that request. This bylaw that we've drafted does not. What it does allow, though, for is employee zones where public access is not available and there's a physical barrier between the employee zone and the public space, that employees would not be required to wear masks there. So a classic example would be, you could be at a restaurant where, the people in the kitchen are physically, there's a physical barrier between the kitchen and where patrons are, and there is no public access to the kitchen. Those people would not be required to wear a mask. If I convert it to a municipal situation, Norfolk County, the guys are running ice. When they're out doing the ice resurfacing, they're in the public space, they wear a mask, they go back to their office where the public is restricted, back in the ice maker's room, they could take their mask off. So it's the creation of these public zones where masks would be required, and employee zones where the public's not available, they would have the option to take off their masks. So the concept of 6 feet separation does not really apply to this bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Mr. Burgess. Building on that a little bit, so the separation is not accounted for in this bylaw. Could it be accounted for in the general policies that a business owner made to implement in-house?
Through the chair, no, the bylaw is specific to if you are in an enclosed space that is access to the public, that a mask must be worn. So that would not be an acceptable. If you wanted to put in, rules around 6 feet of separation, then that would have to be purposely written into the bylaw. We don't have an example of that. We have Haldeman's example, but Haldeman's example is not yet completed at this point in time, and we could. We can do that, but that's not a bylaw that's out there. Most of them are, in fact, all of them are. They define what a public space is, an enclosed public space, and once you define that, thou shalt wear a mask is essentially how the bylaws are written.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that, and that's possibly something that could come as an amendment down the road as this bylaw develops, as we see what Haldeman does if staff are making changes, but at this point in time, the answer is no. My second question is there any merit in including an end date, a renewal date, a reconsideration date? Should we sit back around specifically concerning this bylaw and list it on our next council meeting of the 18th of August? Is there merit in that? I have read those in other bylaws.
And you might not have caught it exactly. It's on the back. It's page 5 of 5. So the effective date of the bylaw is passage, and then it goes to the first date of the regularly scheduled council meeting in October 2020. Currently scheduled for October 20th, unless extended by council. So the bylaw is fixed until the first council meeting in October, but council can choose to extend at any point in time.
Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you. Through you. My question for Mr. Burgess is, we are making this decision as Norfolk County, and I want to have an answer about the service relationship with Haldeman, and if this bylaw is applicable just to our jurisdiction here in Norfolk County, or if we do have an ability, or we are giving direction to the broader health unit that represents both of our municipalities. This is only in effect in Norfolk, correct?
Through the mayor to the councillor, that is correct. This is a Norfolk County bylaw, and it only impacts Norfolk County. Haldeman's County would only impact their county. We have two separate bylaw enforcement officers, counterparts in Haldeman. The only challenge is many of these complaints come through one hotline number with the health unit, and then we would disperse those depending. Or if there were questions, a lot of times questions come to, Councillor Taylor had a good question, and though technically questions should come to bylaw, in reality, many of the questions come through the health unit hotline and get redirected to bylaw, but sometimes they try to answer those questions on that health unit hotline. So they would have some familiarity with both counties' bylaws.
Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The declared state of emergency by Ontario has terminated, right? So what about the cost? What's it going to cost Norfolk County to do enforcement and oversee this whole bylaw?
Through the chair, the province of Ontario did provide some legislation upon closing that extends a lot of the provisions of their Emergency Act, and we are still looking into exactly what that means. So there are some things that will continue to carry on, and the Emergency Act will continue to carry on. As far as cost to the county to enforce this bylaw, it's not known. I'd like to break the question down to two items. One is from an enforcement approach, we will take this as an education approach. Yes, there are set fines placed in the bylaw. We would not anticipate fining individuals. What we hope to do is if there is a concerned citizen who calls with regards to business not complying with it, we would ask the business owner, we would attend at the business, we would ask to see the signs are conspicuously put out there, and we would ask for the policy. We would take the policy and send it to public health to make sure that the policy seems appropriate. If there's deficiencies in the policy, then we would enter into an education mode at that point in time. So the intent of the bylaw is not to spend exceeding amounts of time or money to enforce it. It's more of an education. But if you're looking at cost, each time we have a call on matters such as this, if I go back to, for example, when the province was doing exempt businesses and we were getting all kinds of calls on those activities, it's not uncommon that would take several hours of a bylaw officer's time plus legal counsel's time to look at it. So each call may take 8 to 10 hours to resolve. And you can charge that by our daily rate and figure out what the cost of enforcement is for it. So these things are not cheap to do if you have high volumes of calls. If you pass the bylaw and there's not a high volume of calls, it's not that expensive. It's really around how many calls do you get.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, and through you, Schedule A there, the set fines, failure to provide proof of training. What would that proof look like? What piece of paper would they need to actually generate that?
In most cases, proof of training is usually a signed document by the person who received the training and the person who gave the training at a particular date. It would be, it'd be pretty minimal is what we would request for it. What we haven't done at this point in time, and it's something that, again, we focused on the bylaw, we will be providing businesses with a sample policy that they could download. We'll also provide businesses with a poster that they could also download and print. And we'll probably, it's a good question. I don't think we were anticipating it, but we might actually provide them with a form to say, here's what you record for completing the training. So the intent here is to, the nature of this type of bylaw is to give power to the businesses and have them provide the information to the public to enforce this type of bylaw for mass compliance.
Further questions from councillors? So I guess there's a number of concerns that have already been raised from, the church service and requests from the pastor that they be exempt. to a number of business owners that have written us expressing their concerns. I mean, I find it ironic that we're sitting here as council members. The only one wearing a mask is Councillor Rabbits. And we have never attended a council meeting wearing a mask for this whole time. And yet walking into a store is one thing for 15 or 20 minutes. I think we can all commit to doing that, and we should commit to doing that. But to force employees in some of these establishments to wear masks for the next, however many months on end, is that what we want to be doing? And I think that's the approach that Haldeman's taking, is a Made in Haldeman approach, where if you can maintain social distance, if the business owner, wishes to exempt their employees, that they're going to have that ability to do so. Any thoughts on how we might be able to change that, as opposed to imposing these regulations on our business owners today with effectively, serious concerns that they have raised and we haven't addressed as a council? I guess that was to you, Jason. Is there a way that we could amend some of this today to make some of these changes that are being raised by council members, but they're asking the question, they're getting a no, it's not included in this bylaw. Nothing is to say that we can't make some changes here.
Sorry, and I apologize, Mayor. I thought the question was the council, because it would require a change to the bylaw. So we would, staff will, if council directs us to change what we've proposed, we would certainly take that. The original plan was to work with Haldeman, as I disclosed at the last meeting, to see if we can come up with a harmonized policy between the two counties. We're still open to that suggestion. It might not mean that we actually get there. We may have a difference of opinion. I can't confirm that. Staff, when we look at this and we review it, we also would have some suggested changes. We've missed one definition that we think is required, so we would be open to making changes to it. The issue that the two councillors have raised with regards to the exemption of religious ceremonies, and the issue with regards to putting, I would call an exemption or a provision that if a employer could show social distancing and essentially an exemption to that, that would be something that council would have to direct staff to do, because that would require a bit more time to do that, and that's a fairly different policy than what's been adopted. We're not opposed to it, but we would want that direction, frankly, from council to undertake that.
So I guess, sorry, Councillor, I was having just one more thing. I believe it was yourself, actually, Councillor Rabbits, or maybe it was Councillor Columbus, the definition of the underlying medical condition being excluded. I see a number of businesses I go into and people are wearing face shields. And I think that's generally accepted as an acceptable mean, or as the same barrier protection as a face mask or face covering. Is that included in our bylaw?
Through the mayor to the mayor, no, I think we could certainly add a face shield as it. Most of the bylaws that were out there actually did not define a face shield. They defined mask as something that fit over the nose and mouth. It was very clear how the mask was defined. We could certainly add face shield in there, because I think a lot of people are using face shield for a lot of different reasons. AODA requirements with regards to people with hearing disabilities, that they're able to read lips, but you can't read lips through a mask, so other provisions. We would expect that would be something that maybe an employer could put into their policies. It probably should be in the bylaw, but I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we had, a day to whip this up.
Well, I think that that's kind of just the point that I'm driving at. There's a few things that, I think should have been included in here. We've now seen our business owners have raised, first it was presented to council that all business owners were on board. I think a number of business owners have now reached out and actually have good ideas that are, some of them aren't even necessarily opposed to customers and so on wearing masks, but they have concerns about their employees living their lives for the next number of months on end in masks. And so I just think, even coming out of the aviation industry, post 9/11, cockpit doors was the immediate reaction. The German wings crash would have never happened if there weren't cockpit doors, because now it was, the barrier that was preventing somebody from getting back into the flight deck. So I think often, people are so reactionary to making regulations that the consequences aren't always well thought out. So Haldeman is still a few days away, and I'm just wondering, just putting it out there to council, that if it is the will of council to pass this bylaw, that perhaps we could give some direction to staff today and give people, a couple days to be able to adapt to this and highlight some of those changes that we would like to see in it, and give them the authority to include those changes in the bylaw. Councilor Rabbits.
Thank you. Through you, my question for Jason is about public consultation, specifically with businesses. I realize it's been a real quick turnaround, and if passed today, would we be able to still, reach out to our chambers of commerce, reach out to different business associations, and get that feedback? And just to provide some context for the members that are watching at home of those associations and our broader community. Part of the education campaign Dr. Nessathari was hoping to enact, and will enact regardless if this bylaw is passed or not, was to bring some information back to council of mask use. I think he was originally targeting September, but October would probably be more in line if this bylaw was successful, to bring back some measures regarding the efficacy of the mask wearing, whether people are wearing it or what the hiccups are. If this bylaw was passed, we'd be able to get, I guess, about 3 months, less a few days of information to come back to us here, and perhaps we could tie that into an education campaign and receiving some feedback from either individual businesses or those associations that represent them. Do you foresee that being, part of this bylaw, or do you see us requiring to provide you with that direction today?
Through the mayor to the councillor, to address your question specifically, and Marlene can provide more information, but we are actually, we had scheduled observational analysis and poll taking at various locations through Norfolk. So there was going to be 2 days where we have representatives out there essentially counting how many people are entering and exiting locations with masks on or without masks, and whether they are actually wearing the masks correctly or not. And those are, that's information that we will feed into our educational programming if we need to focus on making sure, a lot of people are wearing masks, for example. We got 95% compliance, but 30% of them are wearing wrong. We don't need to advertise about wearing masks. We need to advertise about how do you wear them properly. If we're at 60% compliance on wearing masks, well, then we're going to pump a different message out there. So that was being done regardless, to be frank, and I can, Marlene can add to it. So we would bring that back. I think October, we'd probably be before October with some of that information that we would share with you. I did just want to, and I apologize, I do want to go back just to one other item that was previously, and it kind of fits into your question with regards to talking to the chambers. I do want to specifically point out that staff were very conscious in saying that policy that business owners must develop and adopt, they had until August 3rd, 2020 to create a policy and adopt it, because we wanted to give business owners some time to actually develop a policy, and frankly we feel that we're obligated to provide them with an example of one, and we haven't had time to do that. So we're going to be issuing that next week to business owners. Is there time to have some consultation? Yes, I think between now and August 3rd, if this bylaw is adopted, we would have time to do that. The only fly in the ointment is that staff are not allowed to change a bylaw. We have to bring that to council. It requires council authority to change a bylaw. So we can redraft it, but it's not effective until council approves it. So, I'll be blunt. I don't like having staff having too much direction in how we enforce things. Like we'll have certain service guidelines, but it's one thing about level of enforcement, which staff can direct. It's another thing to whether we're going to ignore a part of a bylaw to enforce or not enforce. And I would rather get council's direction on those items. So we can still consult. I'm sure whether we want to consult or not, we will have people talk to us about the bylaw, and we can certainly bring suggestions back to council.
Through the chair, if I may just add to Mr. Burgess' commentary, we had planned to do an educational campaign, an observational analysis, despite whether a bylaw was implemented or not. I can confirm that the observational analysis will commence next week, and we will be out both in Haldimand and Norfolk as the Board of Health doing that observational analysis, as Mr. Burgess has already articulated, in the enumeration of who's wearing it, but also how it's being weared and are they truly wearing it over their nose, mouth, and chin for effectiveness. I can confirm that Haldimand County, Norfolk County Communications Department with the Health Unit are currently working on a comprehensive educational campaign, which will be launched on Monday over the next couple of weeks. We will be including such things as information of the chain of infection and how to break that chain, and the ongoing importance of hand hygiene and social distancing. We will focus on why one should wear a mask or a face covering, how to wear a mask, the type and quality of masks, when and where to use a mask, who should wear a mask, and the exceptions. We'll be providing businesses guidances and sample signage, and I heard Mr. Burgess comment on training, so we can definitely add that. The list is not inclusive. We can definitely add more as questions become available over the next several days and weeks from our communities. We will be utilizing multiple venues. The web page will be launched on Monday. We'll be using social media. We'll be doing some interviews. We will bring presentations to council and the Board of Health. We'll be doing videos. There'll be an FAQ, and we'll be using local media and advertisements. Again, masks can only be effective if they're used appropriately. So the campaign is focused on how to use a mask effectively.
Further questions? Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Not directly a question, but I just wanted to build on your comment about delaying this for additional considerations. And I think the problem that that we're already seeing and that I don't want to encourage is we don't need to be trying to drive a wedge through who wears and who doesn't wears, or shaming individuals, especially, in a room like this, only one council member is wearing it. I think it's the exact opposite thing that we need to be doing right now. We need to be highlighting that this is messaging that we're strongly encouraging, and that, I think it should be passed with less judgment and more kindness and leniency in the initial uptake, which is what we spoke about last week, and I'm hearing Mr. Burgess comment on today. I wear a mask daily, but technically in this situation, would we not fall into an employee in a space that's not open to the public? I think that again, we talked about this last week, but the public just wants us to take a position. So if we want to make amendments to this, I think that's well and dandy. That's fine. But I think if we can come out with strong messaging prior to going on summer break and emphasize that leniency in when we look to enforce it, that is the best option in my preference, to make the decision today, to have further discussions on should amendments be made or not be made, but send the message to the public that we are taking a position on it.
Okay. Any further questions of staff? I believe that was more for the debate. So if I could have a mover, and the mover was, Councillor Huffman, and well, I guess we have a new bylaw, so we might as well have a new mover here. Councillor Huffman, did you wish to move that? And Councillor Martin, you're remaining as the seconder?
I didn't hear you, pardon?
well, the other day it was Counselor Huffman moved the motion, you second, but now it's the actual bylaw, so I just was giving Counselor Huffman the,
You're asking if I'd like
if she
to
wanted to
second
move it, did you want to second
Sure.
it? Okay. And any debate now on the motion itself? Counselor Van Passen.
It's been quite a learning curve for myself since last March, and I'm going to offer a point of view that from all the evidence I've looked at, all the information I've gathered, and the opinions I've listened to, and I really don't think we need this bylaw. Currently, if I understand the situation, the rules, the regulations of this country, this province, and this municipality, any business can choose to implement policies right now that either would require masks or not masks. They could require their employees to wear masks or not masks. And there's federal and provincial regs in place that protect them. You know, they can't be dragged in for a human rights violation because they implement that policy. There's regulations in place that if employees choose not to work under the conditions of that policy, they can't be fired and that kind of thing. So it leaves it up to an individual business to decide what policy they want to put in place on their place of business, and that will either increase their business or decrease their business, but it is a personal choice of that business. Once they have those policies in place, individual customers can make a conscious choice of whether they want to enter that business or not enter that business based on their personal choice of whether they want to be where there are masks involved or not involved. The corporation of Norfolk County could actually implement its own workplace policy. We could require masks in enclosed public spaces as our own policy, and use that to protect the residents of Norview, our community centers, Ride Norfolk. But that would be a policy specific to the corporation of Norfolk County as a business, and we're free to implement that. All the official head medical officer of health from the federal government, the provincial government, and the medical officer of health in Norfolk County or Huffman, Norfolk, the recommendations are pretty consistent. That they have recommended for a long time to, use masks where social distancing is hard to maintain. We had a meeting last week where we had quite some discussion with the medical officer of health, and he still maintains that that is the best policy at this time, to be reviewed in September. We're waiting for that dreaded surge again. That's the advice we get from the medical community. The changes, yesterday we were at phase 2, today we're at phase 3. We're opening up the economy, we're opening up different things, but just about everything, if not all of the things that are opening, are exempt from a mask bylaw. Medical officer's health says number one priority is education. We've been working on that policy, and it's due to be implemented on Monday. I look in the bylaw, the definition of an enclosed public space and the exemptions that are automatically in the bylaw, daycare facilities, day camps, private and public transportation, hospitals, doctors' offices, and municipal government. It seems to me those would be the places that are where wearing a mask would be most needed. I'm going to walk into a place full of sick people without a mask because that's exempt, but if I want to nip into to grab something at the grocery store, I got to wear it. That part's not making sense to me. And I think we had this discussion last week that, does the idea of wearing masks make people feel invincible? And then they forget about the social distancing part. And you see that happen. Like, people without masks they tend to stay that 2 meters apart. As soon as they slap on the mask, they think it's a cure-all for everything and they can do whatever they like. And, and I wonder about that. I wonder about the discussion we had the other day about, we're in the lull, the weather is fine, people want to get outdoors, but they're going to get tired of wearing the masks come fall just when they might be needed the most. Again, I question that, but I don't think I can support this bylaw. I think there's enough mechanisms in place for people to make their own choices to protect others by the choices they make. And I will not be voting in support of this. I was up late last night dwelling on this, and a quote came to mind from, I think a lot of times it's been attributed to Mother Teresa. And her saying used to be that we the unwilling, led by the unknowing, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. I think Evan Wright, the author, in his novels, said it better, that the incompetent are leading the unwilling to do the unnecessary. And I don't want to be supporting something that I believe is unnecessary. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Passen. Councillor Columbus.
Madam Mayor, can I ask Mr. Burgess or Ms. Miranda a question?
We just started this new process, but let's try as we move forward in the future to get out of the habit and take on the debates, but go ahead.
Okay, Councillor Van Passen raised it. Public transportation, does that mean that ride Norfolk, you ride the bus, you don't need a mask because it's excluded?
No, through the chair, it's exempted from the bylaw because we don't want to be ticketing ourselves for items. So we will develop our own policy and institute a policy for Ride Norfolk. The municipality is also exempted from the bylaw because we can't be writing tickets to federal government or to the provincial government or writer. Like, we can't have our own bylaw officers write a ticket against the municipality. So that's why it's exempted. It's more of a technical aspect than exempting them, saying they won't be wearing masks.
Thank you. I misunderstood it. Thanks.
Councillor Michelli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yesterday, I had occasion to visit a municipality that does have a mandatory mask bylaw. And I was in a very large retail establishment that did not have air conditioning. And of course, because they have the mandatory mask bylaw, everyone was wearing a mask. And in the relatively brief time that I was in that establishment, I found my wearing of a mask was becoming exceedingly uncomfortable. And it kind of occurred to me what it must be like for the employees of that business to be in that non-air conditioned facility on a very hot, warm, hot, humid day and having to wear that mask all day long during their work shift. And I just felt very sorry for the environment that they are frankly compelled to work in. And I think in general in this instance, and like Councillor Van Passen, I was up late last night contemplating all of this as well. And in the end, I have to believe that this comes down to the amount of trust that we can place in the good people of Norfolk County to use their good adult judgment to decide on whether or not they want to wear a mask, with the general belief I have that they are all considerate, conscientious people and will not put anyone else at risk or in harm's way. And I think that this bylaw may be, in that context, too intrusive in the daily lives of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michelli. Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, through you, to council and the community. Originally, I was the sole councillor to vote against making the masks mandatory. I've had quite a bit of discussion since that council meeting with many members of the community, and while I stand by the comments I made that evening, I am a team player, and it seems to be the will of council to have a bylaw in place or continue to debate and refine it. And to that end, I want to participate and bring forward, if we are going to pass a bylaw, the best bylaw that we can have tailored to the needs of our community. We do have a great amount of seniors in our community, and some of the discussion I've heard from other communities is the concerns about exemptions. I've heard the issue raised of cards. I did have a conversation recently with someone on the sidewalk trying to provide a rationale as to why I champion education and the wearing of the masks, but was hesitant to move too quickly to mandate them. And the conversation quickly turned to, it's okay, you can just fine people, you can demand that they provide you with an exemption card, and I found myself educating, or attempting to educate the individual that you do not have to disclose why you would be exempt from the policy. So I just want to ensure that our policy, that's a really key point in the education campaign, that if we were to pass this bylaw, we need to educate members of the public that we cannot be asking people about the reasons why they may not be wearing a mask. COVID-19, the virus doesn't care about a fine. It doesn't care about whether we pass a bylaw today or not. I'm thinking about what the doctor said, it just takes one cough. And the virus doesn't discriminate against those that are exempt from wearing a mask or not. And this type of conversation, I feel, should be at the forefront of the mask debate, or at least our education campaign, informing people that we need to be compassionate towards one another. It's not my intent to wear this mask and to place any shame on any member of this council. I'm wearing the mask because I'm trying to protect you. You wear a mask to protect me. And we need to make sure that if we are going to pass a bylaw, that it is a compassionate bylaw, and that we educate members of the public not to shame each other, that we explain why there's individuals that are exempt. And part of the policies our businesses should be implementing should be geared towards making an appropriate accommodation, whether that's roadside pickup or providing space and another method of getting the goods or the services from that business. That should be a really large part, and I think that should be at the forefront of our debate regarding this policy. There is a few amendments that I would like to propose, but I want to have an opportunity to speak first, to maybe go around the table before I think we start entertaining any amendments to this policy that's before us. Had a chance to research specifically Brantford's mask policy. There are some good things in there. Toronto was also mentioned, so those were the two that I really sunk my teeth into. And I'd be interested if any other members of council have been either reviewing those two documents and what their impressions were, or if they've researched any other mandatory mask policies that we haven't considered today. Because there is, some concerns with both. For example, the City of Toronto has an act that gives them, different powers that we don't have here. Norfolk is unique in terms of our relationship with Haldeman. I was looking at Brantford, and for example, they're mentioning that their police, Brantford police, would actually be tasked or charged with enforcing that bylaw. And we don't have that relationship with OPP. We don't have the ability to give them that direction. We don't have a municipal police force. So while I stand by many of the comments and the concerns that I still have, I've come here today fully prepared to tailor our bylaw to the needs of our community. If we should enact it, I want to continue that debate, and I don't want to close the door either to continuing the conversation, the debate with members of our community, the businesses, and it's good that we've set at least a benchmark of October to review it again, and if not sooner, we'll be having information coming forward regarding the information from our Board of Health when they're enumerating mask use and trying to understand I still am more concerned about the unintended consequences of a poorly written bylaw, 'cause it just takes one cough. Thank you.
Further. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. My comments are just in relation to other comments from colleagues today. For me, the medical officer of health came and spoke to us and said that he preferred for this decision to be made in the political realm and that further he supports wearing masks, period. We have numerous other bylaws that lack enforcement or have inconsistencies with enforcement issues, so I don't think that we really should hang our hat on the specifics of enforcement and what we're going to do to track down every single person who chooses to not wear a mask. It's about sending messaging that it's encouraged. I think we've had a discussion here about exemptions of phase 3 and new places that are opening. And I too yesterday was out of Norfolk County and I visited Guelph, and masks are mandatory there and everyone was wearing a mask. Stores, through a restaurant, seated to your table, from your table to the washroom, and they took it off to eat. So there is still a role to play for masks even in phase 3 indoor locations that are potentially exempt. Walking into a fitness center, you wear it in until you begin exercise or until you are ready to go. I think also the argument that individuals may be tired and may not comply by the fall, that could be very true. I don't know, but I think there's also an argument to be made here that individuals may adapt and adjust and have a mask as a well-oiled part of their routine come the fall, should we start now. While there is a strong argument that people are considerate and conscientious people who we wish to trust and do the right thing, I fully support that. However, we're contradicting ourselves because we had a much smaller farming community come to us and ask for the same rights and reservations to be made for them, and we were not able to meet them halfway and trust them and know and hope that they would do the considerate, conscientious thing. It is no different than that decision where we're put in a position where we need to make a decision that supports the larger good. I think the strongest argument may be Dr. Nessathari's comment about 3 types of people: those who wear a mask, those who do not wear a mask, and those who are in the middle. And our decision here today moving forward is really going to leverage those who are in the middle, and can we push them farther over to the wearing side. I fully support Mr. Burgess's preference with a policy. I support his preference with looking to enforce the way he has. If that's the wishes of staff, that's fine with me. I think that Councillor Rabbits hit the nail on the head that the virus does not care. Whether we go on summer break, the virus does not care about amendments. But what we can do is take these steps to move forward to try and look for reductions in our numbers and support the community members who are desperately asking us for this. And while we have heard from amendments from our business owners, we've also heard from business owners who are very supportive of just taking a stance and creating policy. So there may be room for amendments down the road. I would fully support that even before the October date should they come forward. But at this point in time, I'm supporting the bylaw.
Taylor.
Thank you, and through you. My fear is that we have our businesses go out of their way to meet exactly what this bylaw says right now. Put plexiglass up to create those enclosed spaces for their employees so that they can have that reprieve from the mask. So I think we should be talking about amendments today. I don't think we shouldn't be. I don't think we should wait for them to come up in the future. I think we should have that amendment in there that shields will include the face covering. It makes a lot of sense. I see a lot of people come into the office with shields on. I think that would be an important one. I also think with the pastors that we should be looking at a 6-foot separation exemption. It would allow the pastors to stand at the front of their congregation and speak. Although the patrons would be wearing masks, they have that ability at the front. As well as an employee exemption. I think we should be looking at an exemption for employees if they can maintain a 6-foot separation, that they don't need to wear a mask. Just a procedural question, if I may, to the clerk. With the amendments, when would we see the bylaw back with those amendments, how do we vote on it? If we vote on it today with those amendments, when we can have those documents, those type of questions.
Through you, Mayor Chop. Some of the amendments will be things that we can write in today and have the mayor and myself sign off on, if that is the desire of council. If you're getting into ones that are really big amendments or don't have a clear thing, like it's directly to scratch out, like I have one here to add the face shield. And that's something very simple. We just add that into the definition, right? That is a very simple thing that we can do today. And there are a number of simple ones that we would be able to accomplish today. And that's important because after this bylaw is, if it is approved, I should say, if it is approved, what I would do is I have to send it off to the Ministry of the Attorney General to get the set fines approved. So if we don't have something final, then it's just delaying the set fines.
I think his question though, so if you write these exemptions in, if Councillor Taylor was to move those amendments, we don't have to reconvene then? We would be able to just, you and I would be able to sign off on it?
Yeah, we'd be able to pass the bylaw today.
And with that, I would like to move in for amendment to include face shields as face coverings. I'd like to move for an amendment to allow for an employee exemption if they maintain a 6-foot separation, and a, yeah, I think those two cover it.
Councillor Huffman, did you wish to, are you okay with the amendment?
Yes, I was just going to speak. Sorry.
Sorry, I just received an email from Chief Page just on the face shield. Just so council has the full information, and I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV. Chief Page has raised the concern face shields alone do not protect someone from airborne droplets. Though it's used by a lot of people as a barrier for some of it, from a medical point of view, when you're looking at, it'll protect people for certain things like sneeze and that kind of stuff, but airborne droplets, it is not effective. And I guess best practice is that the preference is to wear both. However, the bylaw here can also say that may be a substitute in certain circumstances for counselors, and there are issues, I know, when dealing with populations that require you to be able to read lips and other things that face shields are used. So it's up to council. I just wanted to provide council with all the information as I'm getting it.
The face shields, my intention was for those individuals that require the reading of lips or other situations in which a mask can't be worn. Is there a way to include that in the bylaw to word? Yeah, that was my intention.
Did you wish to add, are you considering pastors as employees of the church, or did you wish to add that one?
I consider them employees of the church, so
okay.
it'll.
Councillor Columbus.
Madam Mayor, if we're making changes here, I think we should define underlying medical condition as part of the bylaw.
Sorry, through the chair. So again, I'm doing this in live speed. So the solicitor for the county, there was a purposeful reason why she did not include the definition, though we can include a definition as examples. The challenge with defining that is that it is so wide open, you don't want to limit yourself. And because we cannot actually ask or challenge a medical exemption, there was no real need to define it from her point of view. However, I think, Councillor, from maybe an educational point of view for people reading it, what we could do is say medical conditions can include such things as, and list a few examples, and then, but leave it fairly open because, as noted, we cannot actually challenge a medical condition. They can just claim a medical condition, and we have to accept that. So we can provide some educational definition in there, but not to overly restrict the bylaw.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as a point of order, we don't want to fall down into the little trap we had the other day, but we have a motion on the floor, and I thought that Councillor Taylor put an amendment on the floor. Are we now discussing that amendment, or, okay, so like...
Councillor Huffman
And
approved the
if Councillor
amendment.
Columbus wants to make another amendment to add that, that would be a separate thing rather than the issue that's on the floor right now? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, so you can amend each amendment two times too. So you can have, yeah.
Councillor Huffman?
Just to make sure I'm following procedure, are we still, am I able to give?
You've approved this
I-
amendment?
Yes.
And are we willing to amend the amendment?
Yes.
Okay. And Councillor Martin as the seconder? Okay. Debate now on the amendments. Councillor Huffman?
Thank you, Mayor Chop, through you. I just wanted to add that I too was out of the area in a region that has a mandatory face mask covering and mandate, and there was quite a high number of compliance, and it was nice to see. I do want to emphasize as well that I have had this discussion with numerous individuals regarding the medical exemption and condition, and do understand that we need to keep it vague because there are a wide array of reasons, and we can't challenge a medical exemption. So I do fully support keeping that extremely vague for individuals because we could be looking at someone who's suffering PTSD, or it could be someone with MS, so it's very vague. I've had some interesting conversations over the past number of days. Some of them have been pleasant, some have been extremely unpleasant. But I do support this bylaw, and I do support, I do want to make note that one of the businesses that submitted not in favor of the face mask. I was a patron at that business in the recent past, and I would not return to that business because they don't adhere to the face masking policy, because there is no 6-foot barrier between the staff and the public. So I think it is very important that employers kind of look at things through a different lens, and that we have had feedback from a local medical doctor who, I've tried to word it before and it didn't really come out, and Dr. Gasquire was able to take the words out of my mouth, or the thoughts out of my head, I guess, where I think that there's still a social awkwardness with the face masks and the face coverings, and that if there is a mandate in place, that it allows people to do maybe what they are more comfortable with, and just allowing that protection for individuals. I had a conversation with a resident last night, a constituent, who over the past several months has not worn a mask, but says that they're fully, their entire family is fully and fully willing to cooperate with this bylaw, as it is the potential to save a life, and the least that they can do is wear a mask. And so I do support this bylaw with the amendments today.
Thank you, Councillor Huffman. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, and through you, I was hoping to propose a few amendments myself, if it can be entertained as a separate amendment, or can we only amend so many times? We reach that bar.
Through you, Mayor Chop. So there's two ways to do it. You can do 2 amendments to the main motion, and each of those amendments can be amended 2 more times, but they can't be different than the initial one. So right now we've got 1 amendment with another amendment to it, and the decision for council is to proceed to vote on that amendment now, and then you could entertain another amendment afterwards.
Look, I think this is going to affect people's lives enormously, and so I think it might be worth council just waiving the rules of procedural order on this. Councillor Huffman, if you would, just to hear Councillor Rabbits out, to hear the additional amendments that he would like to make. I'd rather get it right than be wishing we had done this tomorrow.
I
So,
agree with that. I think waiving the procedural bylaw and making
so
sure we
you'll
get it
move
right.
that and a
Yes.
seconder? Counselor Taylor, all those in favor? That's carried. Go ahead, Counselor Rabbits.
Thank you for indulging me, and that's definitely the right move here. We need to be moving through, I think, clause by clause, and my intention here is to request something be added. It's actually from the Brantford bylaw, and I would also like to strike something from the fee schedule. I kind of want to discuss them separately or procedurally, like one at a time. So the first one is something that I was reading the Brantford bylaw that I thought was very good. It's in section 3.b, and it says, child between the ages of 3 and 5 who refuses to wear a face covering and cannot be persuaded to do so by the caregiver be exempt. And that's something I would like to add to our bylaw. The next one's in the fee structure of our bylaw. So we're going to set fines, Schedule A, 23 of our agenda package. So regarding enforcement, I'm wary about placing too much of an onus on a business owner to be the enforcing arm or the person required to enforce the bylaw, and putting them in sort of an adversarial maybe relationship with their patrons. And so I think it's very good that we have a structure where we're saying, look, you need to educate about our bylaw, you need to craft your own policy, you need to have training, you need to have signage. But if we're looking down our fee chart here, ours is proposing failure to post a required text. I assume that's really referring to signage. We might want to add that language. Failure to adopt a required policy. I kind of would like to amend that to say required to provide a copy of our bylaw or educate our bylaw, which is the second point there. So we might have a redundancy. Failure to provide proof of training at the bottom, that's a good one I'd like to keep in, but the one I'm thinking about striking, or I would like to have some further discussion about, is failure to prohibit entry in accordance with bylaw. To me, that seems to be putting the business owner in bylaw shoes. Are they required to report, those that are not following store policy? I think now I'm asking a question. I'm looking at Jason. I'm considering striking that as an amendment, and I think I need to hear from staff what the implications of that are, and maybe have an answer to some of the concerns that I was raising about putting a business owner, in the shoes of bylaw. It seems to be someone else's job. It seems to be our job. It's our bylaw.
Sorry, to clarify that, and we'll clean up the text, it should be failure to prohibit entry of a bylaw officer into the premise for purposes of enforcing the bylaw. So the intent is the bylaw officer can come in to the premise and request to see the signage and request the policy that the business has adopted. And that's really it. If they refuse to do it, then we can fine them for that. But it's not, the reason we chose this policy, and just to be clear, it says failure to adopt a required policy and failure to provide a copy of the required policy. That's the business's policy, not our bylaw. So if a bylaw officer shows up, they're allowed to enter the public space. They're not allowed to be blocked from the public space. They're allowed to see the sign, and they're allowed to request the policy that the business has drafted. There's no requirement for the business to actually post our bylaw. It's just really they need to have a copy of their policy available for bylaw if questioned. So I think we need to just tidy up the wording for that failure to prohibit entry. And the reason and the rationale behind having the businesses do it is these are judgment calls. You're crafting a motion about whether a person who has a young child can't get a child to wear the mask. I don't want my bylaw officer making that determination. I want the business owner this is going to impact their business providing that exemption because they have a policy that they've provided, he or she, the business owner or the operator, will make that decision. Or if someone presents and says, I have a medical condition, there are some businesses, frankly, that will just say, and it's the business owner's choice, they'll just say, sorry, we're not accepting that. Everyone that comes in has to wear a mask. That's the business owner's choice. If another business owner gets presented with the same situation and says, I will grant you the exemption and you can come in, and that's fine. It's just a matter of them having a policy and them administering the policy. So it is, we do not want to put our business owners in the place of bylaw. It's up to them to choose how they want to enforce their policy. So that's why we're giving them the flexibility. But I can see the confusion on that thing, failure to do it. It's really just failure to provide entry to our bylaw officers who are looking to enforce the bylaw. So we can, we can change that.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I was off for other call.
I'm a little unclear about council. I'm sorry, I don't know why it does feedback. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to clarify the question from Councillor Rabbits, and because I'm a little confused by the question and the answer, and I'm not completely sure they're correct. So I thought I should ask.
I will start. My question was specifically to the set fines. It's 1, 2, 3, it's 4 down. Failure to prohibit entry in accordance with bylaw 2020-66. And my interpretation of that, Paula, was that the business owner would be denying entry to a patron, and that if they failed to do so, they would be receiving a $1,000 fine.
Yes, that is actually what was intended by that language. It was not related to the entry of the officer. So to clarify, because there is no actual offense written in the bylaw in any event related to obstruction, though that probably would apply anyway under the Municipal Act. But what it was intended to do, because the bylaw does require a business owner to refuse entry to people who won't wear a mask subject to the exemption. So you can envision a situation where patrons are attending and wearing a mask and they see that others are not without obvious reason, and we might receive a complaint, investigate it, do nothing, or we do something. It's just a set fine, which means if we choose not to have a set fine, then there's still a possibility of going the extra mile, if you will, issuing a summons and getting an information and laying a charge and going through a prosecution. That's the difference. The set fine simply allows us to ticket, whereas the offense exists either way. It's a question of whether you want to make it ticketable or whether you have to go through the trouble of an actual prosecution. Other options are to change the amount. So, for instance, we have proposed $1,000 for each of those offenses. You could decide it's less. You could decide it's $100. You could decide it's $50. You could decide it's $500. There's no magic to the number. It simply reflects that it's a higher number because we're dealing with a business, whereas if we were dealing with individuals we were trying to ticket, we'd probably pick a lower number. So that's what that is intended to do. You are correct in the way it was drafted, and so I thought I should just, if you don't want a set fine for that at all, or you want a lower number, that is an option as well.
I apologize, Council. So I misinterpreted that because other bylaws, it's specifically to the bylaw enforcement officer is a requirement for the business to provide access to bylaw. They can't reject it. So maybe we can circle on that issue.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if I may speak to it further, I would like it stricken at this point in time. I see there's some disagreement between our solicitor and our CAO as to its interpretation. And I would like it stricken not only for that reason, but I feel that it is putting that business owner in a very difficult situation. And what put me onto this is when I was researching the Brantford bylaw, they actually require that an owner-operator failure to ensure face coverings is worn by patrons. If an owner, or operator fails to ensure that face coverings are worn by the patrons, they themselves could be fined $300. And so I'm listening to that language, I'm considering it. Is that putting an imposition on the business owner when, really they should be making that call to bylaw, inviting them into their business and having, them make that judgment call. The business owner at that point has already provided the education, the policy, posting the signage, informing patrons, making and masks available, ensuring that their employees are abiding by the restrictions that are in place. And then we're asking them to go and play bylaw officer, or we'll fine them, from my perception. And so that's why I'm asking for it to be removed, unless that concern can be addressed with another clause or some sort of verbiage. I'd love to discuss the fee structure later, but let's maybe just talk about that fourth bullet point down and whether we would like to accept that amendment to remove it or reword it. I'd like to hear from my colleagues now that we've heard from our solicitor and our CAO.
Councillor Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Councillor Rabbit. My thoughts about it are, what if you have patrons at an establishment and someone starts to smoke? They've broken the bylaw. So if the owner doesn't put an end to it, and they, don't go over and say, there's no smoking, you need to put this out, then, so there's that, to adhere to the bylaw. The second thing is, and they'd probably remove the individual from the premises, but they would have to go over and say, there's no smoking in this establishment, it's against bylaw, whatever. The other case would be, is that it certainly wouldn't be accepted if there was an establishment, a patron started to smoke, and the owner continued to allow them to do that and defiantly breach a bylaw. So I think that we almost need to kind of see it in that way, and that's where this just starts to become, in my mind, part of the normal aspect of things, well, up until October 20th, where we review things. So that's how I see it in terms of the bylaw piece, is that there is an onus there for the business owner to protect the other patrons as well.
Thank you for that, and if I may respond. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I'm trying to walk myself through the scenario. So someone's smoking in your business. You inform the person that that is a prohibited activity. They can't smoke there. You would tell them about the policy. You kindly ask them to leave or to stop smoking. And failure to do so, would result in you contacting bylaw and having an enforcement officer come down and do their job. In the context of a mask, I would hope that you would do the same thing, that you would inform the individual that you do have a mask policy, maybe point them to the signage, say, I'm sorry, unless you have an exemption, I'm not going to ask you about that, but unless you have an exemption, you are required to leave the premises, or I'm going to have to contact bylaw. And I'm worried that the way it's worded is, if someone's smoking in my business, I'm going to be fined, regardless if I follow the proper steps of educating, asking them to move, showing them the signage, and contacting bylaw. I feel that the way it's written is, I do have that onus, but it's also, I could be fined, regardless if I do the right thing and educate the person, show them the signage, ask them to leave, or I'll have to contact bylaw, that I would still be fined $1,000 for any instance. I just want to make sure the language is very clear that no, a business owner that's going to be educating, showing signage, and following up with the appropriate enforcing bodies, that they wouldn't be subject to fine. That's my intent here. And if we could maybe word it just that way, I think that would address maybe both concerns.
Yeah, through the chair, my concern with, we have to be able to execute the bylaw. And the concern is, the reason we chose this method is that the owners of the businesses or the operators of the businesses have the best, insight in what's going on into their item. And what I don't want is calls to bylaw saying someone's at XYZ place without a mask, right? And then bylaw having to show up to determine whether the person is appropriately or inappropriately wearing the mask and what the operator has done. That would, we'd have to hire an army of bylaw officers if that's the case. This bylaw was designed to say, is the business operating appropriately, trying to do the right things, not deal with individual cases of whether an individual is wearing a mask or not. So I can understand from the solicitor's point of view, that's the tool to make sure that the owner and operator is, enforcing the rule or doing it. But I think at least, I would say at least at the early days, I would, as far as executing a bylaw that will, that we could actually execute, I would be a little concerned with the enforceability or our ability to enforce the bylaw. The other thing, Councillor Rabbits, to your point is, an owner calling bylaw to exit someone from the property, that's private property rights. Our bylaw officers have no ability to do that. All our bylaws, so we can't go and have someone removed from a property. The owner has to exercise their property rights, and the call would have to go to the OPP as a trespass complaint, not to bylaw on a masking complaint. So it's a refusal of entry because it's not against the policy, and then after that, bylaw is not involved. I guess the issue would be for bylaw to try to determine whether an owner is inappropriately or ignoring, the bylaw of having people with masks covered, we would have to prove somehow that they never did ask for an exemption or never made those judgment calls. And I think it would be extremely hard for a bylaw officer to be able to try to establish that case to a point where they, a fine could be levied, because essentially they would have to interview everybody that wasn't wearing a mask, confirm that none of those questions were asked. None of those people would then just claim an exemption because they know I can just say whatever and I don't need to wear a mask. I think it would be difficult to do it. I understand why the solicitor put it in. And I think we'd be open to it, because I think the overriding, if staff interpreted, council's intention and the intention of these other bylaws, when you look at John Tory, he's been on the record with the Toronto bylaw, and you look at a lot of the other places that have done this, Toronto hasn't put a fine out to date. They're not intending to fine people for this. This is an educational tool, and it's a way to educate, proper compliance. So if council decides to take that out, it's not going to, offend staff at this point in time. I would have trouble saying that we would be able to enforce it on that basis anyways.
Councillor Rabbits, can you list the amendments that you'd like to make then again, and Councillor Huffman's gone. Well, let's wait for the mover. Do we want to take just a 5-minute break then? Councillor Huffman's gone. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Mayor, I think she's on her way back.
She here? Okay.
If I may respond to the CAO, when the information just received, though, it is a common comparison that I've been receiving in the community to a smoking bylaw, very similar to being a masking bylaw. And I've had the debate with some community members about the fidelity regarding the two. And I feel that there's a bit of a lack of fidelity between the two, because it's not that simple. I mean, Smoke Free Ontario and the fact that we'd be sending OPP or someone from our health unit, they're violating the Smoke Free Ontario Act. I'm butchering that name. But there's an act that governs that, whereas this is a municipal bylaw, and the onus for enforcement falls squarely on our shoulders, whether we can enact, whether we can do that effectively or not. So I just want a clear indication what violating that particular clause looks like. Is it a member of our health unit that would be responding? I believe it's our bylaw team that's going to be responding to each and every. And I'm not trying to create a situation where they'd be having calls that were frivolous or that they could not adequately respond to. I want the business owner to know, sort of step by step, what they do if they have a patron that's not following the bylaw. And they shouldn't be worried that it's going to negatively reflect on them as non-compliant.
No, I agreed. And the smoke-free bylaw, though there are some similarities, the difference is from an enforcement point of view, it's very easy from an observational basis to see if someone's compliant to the bylaw or not. They're either smoking, and you could identify that from several feet away, and the bylaw officer has no problem enforcing that. This this bylaw has ingrained exemptions in it where you cannot actually identify whether they're compliant or not. So that's where the compliance issue is. So that's why there's a difference with it from an enforcement point of view. But it would be, if they want someone removed, that's not bylaw. That's why this bylaw is very tight. There's 3 requirements for a business to have. They must have a policy in place, they must have a signs in place, and they must train their staff. That's the 3 things that a business owner needs to have. And one of the reasons that, when I talked to some of my colleagues in the other municipalities, is that provided businesses with a greater degree of how bylaw was going to treat them under the mask bylaw. They needed to tick 3 boxes, right, and then go from there. If we get into the situation down the road, where things may be going worse and we need tighter rules around mask bylaws and there's greater enforcement, we could take a look at different provisions. But if this is about getting people to wear masks to reduce risk on an educational basis, I did not want to overburden the businesses or give them a situation where it was highly unpredictable. It was up to individual bylaw officers' judgments on how things were going to be determined. So this is, do these 3 things, work, do it as best you can. We'll review it in October. If we need to make changes in October, we'll make the changes in October to enforce it. So I agree with you, Councillor Rabbits. Businesses need some certainty in that, and that's why we went to this model of bylaw versus a model where it was enforced individually and it'd be much more difficult to enforce. So I hope I answered your question on that.
Thank you, and through you, the mayor, just prior to Councillor Huffman rejoining us, had asked me to re-articulate my amendments.
Oh, I need it.
And I will do so at this point in time if that's still in order. Okay. So again, the clause that I would like added to the exemption list was a child between the ages of 3 and 5 who refuses to wear a mask or face covering and cannot be persuaded to do so by their caregiver. Just making sure the clerk is finished writing. And then for our set fines, Schedule A, I would like the 4th clause removed, and that clause is failure to prohibit entry in accordance with Bylaw 2020-66, whereas a business owner is required to, I'm trying to remember the exact order that Jason presented his 3-point concise.
I'm sorry, it's the county solicitor again. If I could just
Here,
clarify for you, the set fine language reflects the offense as it's written in the bylaw. It's not normally subject to drafting in the way that I think you might think it's subject to. Typically, set fines are not part of a schedule when they're initially presented to council, or they may be, but they are only intended to be the short form language reflecting the offense in the bylaw itself. And so that is what that language does. If you change the language of the set fine, that doesn't make sense. What you would have to change, if you want to change the rule, is the bylaw itself. So I just want to clarify for you that the set fine is not normally something we would even present to council. It is the bylaw itself. I mean, the language of the bylaw itself, then a set fine would be drafted short form language to reflect the actual offense in the bylaw. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about how to deal with this. From my perspective, either it stays in wording that reflects the offense with some amount of a fine, whether it's $1,000 or $500 or $20, or you just take it out, or you have to amend the bylaw itself.
Thank you for that, Paula. And from what I was hearing, Schedule A, set fines, is separate and apart from our bylaw discussion, and that schedule is really just a fee schedule that is a supplementary document. Would I be correct from what I've heard?
Maybe Paul, I didn't hear the question.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yes,
the
yes,
set
you did.
fine's separate. It's something that she sends to the, it has to be approved by court. So it's something that she sends in subsequent to it. So it would not actually, it's something that would be actually, Paul is on the line now, but it's something that has to be approved by the courts before it can actually be
Yes,
administered.
that's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Well, with that, I mean, it was before, so I thought it was subject for debate. I guess I will rescind that amendment, since it's not actually amending a bylaw, it's amending a schedule, and I guess we'll either have further discussion about that, but, from my perception, what Jason said about education, what Jason had said about the signage, and requirements to have a policy, like, to me, that is very straightforward and clear, that you are compliant with our bylaw if you do those three key things. And the fine schedule, I find to be, it seems to be different than that. There's added items in there that are of concern to me. We can discuss that at a later debate. The direction I was simply given, what I'm attempting to give, is that there is some issues with the wording of that fourth clause down in our set fine schedule. So we can discuss that more, or maybe see what we get back once we send it to the Attorney General for fines. So with that, those were the only two amendments or concerns that I had, and I want it tabled, so thank you.
Councillor Van Passen, I'll let you, I didn't see if you've been chomping at the bit here with us.
I don't know about chomping at the bit, but this was all explained the other day. I have read, I don't know how many different regulations, instructions, orders, and bylaws over the last little while, and the vast majority of which, by the way, are issued by the medical officer of health, not by the municipalities, contrary to what maybe the media keeps saying, but there are two types, and I think the CAO explained this the other day. The one type puts the onus on the individual to obey the law, and the other one puts the onus on the business to implement a policy, but I guess it's easier to do that because it makes it a lot easier that we don't have to do the dirty work. We put the job of doing the dirty work onto the business owners. They're the ones responsible to make sure everybody wears a mask, and the individual themselves are not responsible for that. And, we had that discussion. We gave staff the direction that we wanted to go in that direction of doing the Toronto type bylaw, which actually, and Councillor Rabbits hit the nail on the head, because of the City of Toronto Act, they are both the municipal government and the health unit all in one, so they are a little bit different. So when, they're basically issuing those rules under their hats as the health department again, so that's another large chunk of the population. It's not a municipal bylaw, it's under the Health Act, but that's an easier way for us to implement it quickly. And like the more we discuss this, the worse it seems to get in my mind. And I also find it rather hard, and I think our CEO touched on this earlier, we haven't developed our own policy ourselves as a corporation and as a business, and we have no example of what they should or could or will look like, don't know what they will cover or not cover, but we are going to implement a bylaw that dictates that every business in Norfolk County has to create one of those, and we don't even know what we're asking them for yet. So again, we're doing things in a vacuum. We had a question or a possible amendment to this bylaw about face shields, and again, we are missing our medical officer of health who could offer a professional opinion with the medical background. Like, whose advice do you want? Do you want mine, or do you want a guy with more letters behind his name than I have in my whole name? His CV is longer than my whole life story. If I want medical advice, I'm going to ask him, or our medical officer of health. I'm not going to go ask Dr. Internet that will give me any answer I want to find, because no matter what the question is, I'll find an answer that fits mine. And again, we're making decisions in a vacuum to try to shove something through that is going to be quite a burden on every business in this county. And yeah, no matter how well-intentioned, it has to be workable in the real world as well. And, you know, this is an amendment to something that I hope doesn't pass, but again, my job would be to make sure that on the chance that this bylaw does pass, it is actually the best bylaw that we can present. And I think Councillor Rabbit sort of laid that out as his point of view as well, that, you know, it has to be something that's workable and it's good. And again, whether it, in the end of the day, it gets final approval or not, we want to make whatever is offered at the end of the day to be the best possible option in front of our council. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Huffman, were you willing to accept that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, and the seconder? Okay. So if we could go through the list, did you want me to go through it, or?
I have some things because there was different ways to achieve the end goal of some of the things that council was suggesting. So I'll start at the beginning, and then it's up to council whether or not you want to go through it in reverse, or the amendments are in reverse or in chronological order. So the first one was that bylaw 2026 be amended as follows: to include face shield under the definition of mask or face covering following medical mask, and that a 3A4 be amended to delete within an area designated for them and not for public access, and replace therein anywhere where 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained or. So that would delete on 3A4 and allow employees and agents of the person responsible for the enclosed public space anywhere where 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained or within or behind a physical barrier would be exempt from the bylaw. Just to read that out so everybody's aware of exactly what it will mean. That is the one. And then the next one is that the amendment be amended through the addition of the following wording following face shield and definitions, and it's just in brackets, for persons with an underlying medical condition, end bracket. And then we go on to the rules of order being waived. Okay, and so this is the next one that was seconded by Rabbits and Huffman, that the amendment be amended through the addition of a section 3A7 to read as follows: that a child between the ages of 3 and 5 who refuses to wear a face mask or face covering and can't be persuaded to do so by their caregiver. So those are the totality of the amendments, I believe, and just wanted to make sure that they're fitting with exactly council's intent.
Okay, I'm not sure, you've actually left me a little, the face shields, your intent was not just people with a medical condition that need a face shield, correct? Many people, I believe, are wearing them that can't deal with wearing a mask all day long.
Yeah, initially I would, it can't deal with it. There may be a medical condition that's involved in that if they're wearing the face shield.
But we're going to accept a face shield for anyone.
This is one of those situations I would like to hear Dr. Necessary speak on.
Marlene?
Through the chair to Councillor Taylor, I just want to reinforce some of the commentary from Chief Page. Although face shields are another tool that are used for infection control, it does create an additional barrier. They do not prevent airborne droplets. They're typically used in conjunction with the masks, and they are not substitutes for masks or face coverings.
In that case, the medical condition or someone that may, if your patrons may need to read lips in those types of situations.
Councillor Huffman?
I'm just wondering, in terms of that, what we could put down is that to be AODA compliant, I think there needs to be something in there regarding that with the face masks. With the shields, the face shields.
That's why I was just wondering if it wasn't better just to keep it high level, and then you guys were going to work to put it into the bylaw afterwards. The following, amendments were to.
Just through council, I think certainly when we come back on August 18th, there'll be an opportunity to make some further tweaks. But as Mr. Burgess identified, the staff, council can't delegate authority to make changes to a bylaw. It's an authority that only you hold as council. So unless you wanted to change the wording to require that there, you know, it
Okay,
would be
in that case,
the
Andy, carry on. We'll move on here. Okay, so Councillor Huffman would like something added in. If somebody needs that to be AODA compliant. Would that not fit with the medical condition, though?
Yeah,
Would it be appropriate for me to speak to that? Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, go ahead, Paula.
Sorry about that. So, I mean, whatever AODA compliance requires, it requires under the Act. And I don't think there's actually a need to write it into the bylaw because it's just whatever is required of us through that Act. In terms of the code also does, though, address those issues. Of course, the code is explicitly referenced in there in the context of accommodations. And primarily that's the issue. A person under this bylaw can take a mask off completely, even if they're, you know, the idea behind it was you could take a mask off if you require it to accommodate someone. So if a person has a hearing disability and they require it for being able to read lips, then you have a right under this bylaw to take off your mask. So for the brief period you might be interacting with that individual, hopefully from a safe distance. So that's how this bylaw was intended to address issues like that. Having a face shield was not contemplated simply because none of the bylaws I reviewed contemplated using a face shield, and now I can understand a little better why based on what I've heard from Ms. Miranda and others around how they're not actually effective for the purpose. So in my view, it's unnecessary to add anything about AOTA.
Sorry, just to be maybe of assistance, I don't think it needs to be included in the bylaw itself to keep the bylaw clean, but we can include it in our guidance documents to businesses as they develop their policies. So, you know, a mask or a face shield is not the same as a mask for water droplets, but may be used in these situations. This is hence the reason for the educational campaign.
Did you have something to say?
Through the chair, I was just going to reiterate the education campaign, and we'll add that as another complement to the campaign.
Okay, and I know I can't participate in debate, but I just, an idea that just came to mind in terms of the employees, and I'm not suggesting one direction or another, just something to consider would be whether or not you want the agreement of the employer. If the employer wants their employees to wear masks, is the employee going to rely on the exemption, or are they exempt? It's just an issue that I could see arising.
Through the chair, I think the way the bylaw is written is that the employer has control of his workplace. He or she sets the policy. They must train the employee. If the employee refuses it or has an acceptable exemption, then the employer or the operator of the business would have to grant that exception or deal with it on that basis. So it's completely in the business owner's realm to control that, to control their workplace.
Councilor Bishali.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regard to that measure, I just frankly see it as just another divider between employee and employer, between residents. I just don't want employees to feel that they are, put in a position where if they choose to exercise an exemption that they may in one way or another disappoint their employer or be otherwise penalized in some sort of unobservable way.
Okay, Councillor Huffman, you're still good then? You've moved all the amendments. Councillor Martin, you're still good. Anything further? Can we call the vote? Call the vote.
So I'll go through them one at a time then. So That the amendment be amended through the addition of an item 3A7, a child between the ages of 3 and 5 who refuses to wear a mask or face covering and can't be persuaded to do so by their caregiver. All those in favor? Carried.
Okay, I just want to make a couple comments before we move on to the next.
That was the first.
Oh, I thought.
Sorry. Okay, so moved by Councillor Huffman, seconded by Councillor Martin, that the amendment be amended through the addition of the following wording, following face shield and definitions, and then in brackets for persons with an underlying medical condition. All those in favor? Carried. And moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Huffman, that bylaw 2020-26 be amended as follows to include face shield under the definition of mask or face covering following medical mask, and that a 3A4 be amended to delete within an area designated for them and not for public access, and replace therein with anywhere where 6 feet of social distancing cannot be maintained. Or, all those in favor? Oh, yeah, where 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained. Sorry, I misspoke. All those in favor? Carried. And then the main motion as amended. All those in favor on the bylaw? This is approving the bylaw. Do you want a recorded vote or? No? Oh, sorry.
I apologize. I did have some clarification from legal counsel on Councillor Rabbit's earlier question on the set fine. So just to provide everyone with clear information, if council so chose to strike the line in its entirety without amending the other things, that's appropriate. So if council does want to do that, that's appropriate, but you have to take out the whole line. You can't change the wording and that kind of stuff. You just have to just strike that as a potential fine in its entirety, if that's an option that council would want to consider.
Councillor Rabbits, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, that was my original intent, and I would like to table that to have it stricken from the fine schedule, please.
Councillor Van Passen, I saw your hand.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I was just wondering whether we're no longer allowed to have any debate on the original motion, like it got stopped because an amendment was made. We had debate on that amendment. That amendment is now added to the main motion. And does that mean that we automatically cut off discussion of the main motion and we can't make any comment on the whole bylaw in it as itself?
At what point were you cut off from discussing it? I'm confused.
The clerk wanted to take a recorded vote on the bylaw itself immediately, right?
I thought we were going to run all the changes as one whole list, like we do every other time that we have amendments. So that's why I'm a little bit confused here that we've gone through each one individually. But
Just for the purpose of clarifying for the bylaw, because we're approving this bylaw today, we need to scratch it out and really have it signed before you and I leave today. That was the main intent. But we do still have Councillor Rabbit's amendment that which is still in order, and then the debate is allowed.
Councillor Huffman, did you wish to accept that amendment?
My apologies, which amendment?
Councillor Rabbits, did you want to go over striking the line?
The striking, that one, okay. I just wanted to, my only question is that the way that Paula explained it, I understand that it was a separate piece, the fee schedule. So in terms of the actual bylaw though, where in the bylaw would we have to make a change to reflect the striking of that on the fee schedule? Does that make sense?
It does to me, thank you. And through you, I believe Jason had just received some information from Paula indicating that we could not change the language, but we could strike that from the fee schedule. And that new information was just given at the end of our list of amendments, and that's why I retabled it. I thought I wasn't able to do so. So Jason, would you be able to provide some clarification to Councillor Huffman's question, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the mayor to
It's easier for me to clarify it, but.
Sorry, through the mayor to Councillor Huffman. So what it really would mean is that there would be no set fine at this point in time on the adoption of a owner of a facility that failed to prohibit entry in accordance with the bylaw. So if there was situations where an owner was flaunting the effectiveness of the bylaw by not actually attempting to enforce it, we wouldn't be able to fine at this time. I think it's one of those things that we'd want to review to see if that's really an issue we're dealing with. And, we can potentially add it back later on if we find it to be something that we're dealing with. I guess when we were doing this originally, it was more around getting something out on the street that people can start to adapt, and we can then we can see what the effect of the bylaw is and if we need further changes. Like I said, we do have some concerns about the enforcement of it, but what it would mean, Councillor Huffman, is to your point of a business owner just allowing people not to wear masks and flaunting it, we would not be able to enforce it at that time. There would be no set fine for that. But it could be something that council could consider later through the processes of other changes.
If I can just maybe help to add some clarity. So in Quebec, they've applied the fine to the businesses as opposed to the individual. In this set fine schedule, as Jason's saying, if you strike that entire line, what is the fine that you're proposing then? There is no other set fine. That's
correct. And if it's Paula Brutus, through you, Madam Mayor, what it would mean is the only way you can enforce that is through a prosecution. And the potential fines are addressed through a court in accordance with the Provincial Offences Act. That is the fundamental difference between having a set fine and not having a set fine. You can ticket for some fixed, reasonable amount that doesn't require going through a prosecution, although a person may contest a ticket. They're entitled to do that. Or you have to do something called lay in information, go in front of the Justice of the Peace, lay in information, and then the court has to issue an information and set down a date for returning to the court, or however we're doing it now in COVID, to appear. So the only thing set fines do is essentially allow us to ticket the offense rather than requiring us to go through a prosecution. So what I was attempting to explain is that the language of the set fine is only intended to reflect the offense that's already in the bylaw. So that tweaking that is sort of not that important. I mean, we can always work on that afterwards before we submit it, as long as it reflects what the actual offense is. You can reduce the amount from 1,000 to 500 to 50, whatever, or just or we just decide not to submit it as a set fine to be able to ticket. I hope that clarifies it.
At the end of the day, enforcement is going to be challenging regardless. We know that, even in terms of asking for identification and so on. So the difference in Quebec is that they've put the onuses on businesses so that if they are refusing to adopt the policy and so on as a whole, then you have a mechanism to be able to go and say, hey, this is our bylaw and this was your obligation to enforce this coming in. If you remove it, you have no mechanism, so.
Well, you would still be able to prosecute. You just want to be able, a bylaw officer.
You wouldn't have a set fine.
You don't have a set fine, and there wouldn't be a ticket approach. And I think for something that is as egregious as that, not just like my concern is, at least for the next small time, this should be an educational thing. This should be something that we're trying to work with the community to get to a certain point in time. And I don't want my bylaw officers, because we are complaint-based, they sometimes get put between a rock and a hard place. You have people clamoring on one side to do something, and another party on the other side asking to do something else. I think this makes it very clear that unless it's so far out there that the owner is acting in such bad faith, we'll go through the process of a full prosecution at that point in time versus a ticket. That would be worth it. But this is really about, for the next few months, getting businesses to post a sign, adopt a policy, educate staff. From now to October, that would be the intent, to take that educational approach. If there is something that's egregious, we can go down a prosecution, or sometime prior to October. If we think we're seeing that these are issues, we can come back with a much more detailed prepared bylaw and some more information that we can make the adjustments to.
Would it not be safe to say that it's also sending a signal that, you know, we're not there to police on an individual basis. Our bylaw enforcement officers, that Norfolk County's phone starts ringing off the hook that so-and-so wasn't wearing a mask in the store. I mean, you know, we don't have the capacity to do that. So are you still wanting to move ahead with that strike? Or?
Through you, I am. The situation, as you've described it to me, is supporting me removing it. Correct? Okay, so what we've heard from Jason is if we were to strike it, again, we'd be focusing on compliance with education, signage, and training, and that we wouldn't be burdening either our bylaw or our business owners with playing bylaw officer. So I feel that your comments were supporting removing it, not leaving it in. Okay.
Councillor Huffman?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Roberts. I do understand what you're saying. I completely understand it. But my point is that I don't see this in the beginnings of this bylaw as us being in a punitive situation with business owners. So I don't think that, you know, on next Wednesday, the bylaw police are going to be going out and handing out $1,000 fines kind of thing. We'll be in the educational stage. This bylaw is not meant to be punitive. It's meant to be in the best interests of the constituents of Norfolk County for health purposes. So I think we're focusing too much on the negative aspect of it. And I see with leaving that in there so that down the road is that if we do have someone who, because there have been some very drastic and draconian comments made to people and about the bylaw, is that if there was a business that very blatantly was not adhering to the bylaw, is that there is a mechanism in place. I don't see this as individual. I would prefer to leave it in, actually.
Just to be clear, though, again, there is still a mechanism if they so chose to go down that route. It's just not a set fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there any feedback from anyone else on this, or is this just my
Did you, as the seconder, want to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. I would take a similar position. I think that staff are understanding we're looking for leniency in education campaign, slow start. I've said it a handful of times. It's about taking the position. I say we take it, we get it approved, and we use it only when necessary. Don't feel like it needs to be used. It's there if you need it instead of going back later.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, maybe this complicated, fancy legal language is a bit over my head, but could somebody point out to me anywhere in this proposed bylaw where Norfolk County requires anyone to wear a mask? What this bylaw does is forces every business to create a policy in that business where it is that business forces everybody to wear a mask. We're getting our local businesses to do the dirty work. There's nothing in here that says Norfolk County is making you wear a mask. It says we are creating, every business needs to create a policy to enforce these rules that we don't want to enforce ourselves. So unless I'm missing it, which happens quite often, that I don't really grasp all these fancy whereases and what fors, but if somebody could point out anywhere where it says Norfolk County requires any citizen of Norfolk County to wear a mask, I'd like to see where that line is.
That's the approach. That was the difference in the two strategies. You place it on the individual, you place it on the business. That was the strategy they took. It's one or the other. So, back to you wanted to leave it in then as the mover, and seconder as well, you want to leave it in. Okay, so we're going to proceed.
Through you, that the main motion be amended through the addition of, the main motion as amended be amended through the addition of the following clause, that Schedule A, the line respecting failure to prohibit entry in accordance with Bylaw 2060, to leave it in? Okay, sorry. So the main motion as amended is now before council. So essentially the motion before you now is to approve the bylaw as amended.
All those in favor? Are we? Councilor Van Passen, did you have, I feel like we've debated, we were going to try to limit our debate here, and we've been around in circles. Did you have something further to add? Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Mayor, but I think I've made my point several times.
Okay. All those in favor?
Could I request a recorded vote on this, Madam Mayor?
For approval of the bylaw as amended, Councilor Rabbits.
Yes.
Councilor Martin.
Yes.
Councilor Michele.
No.
Councilor Huffman.
Yes.
Councilor Van Passen.
No.
Councilor Columbus.
Yes.
Councilor Taylor.
Yes.
Mayor Chop.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-2.
I would like to make a couple comments, though, to follow along Councilor Van Passen, since I wasn't allowed to participate in the debate. I mean, at this point, at the end, it's clearly the will of council to bring the bylaw into effect, and my vote obviously wasn't going to change that. Originally, I was going to ask that it be recorded in the minutes that I wasn't going to be voting against the idea of masks. That I am in agreement with our medical officer of health that as we spend more of our lives back indoors this fall, that I think it is a tool that could be instrumental to both protecting our citizens and keeping our economy moving. And like Councillor Martin, I also agree that there's two schools of thought, that people could either be used to them by fall, or they could be so sick and tired of wearing them that it won't be as useful as it maybe could have been. Like the rest of the issues, though, that we've dealt with throughout the pandemic, I think it's all new and that there is no playbook on any of this. So, you know, again, I mean, now I have supported this because the employee amendment was the biggest one for me, that I couldn't see supporting forcing employees to wear masks day in and day out. But I am rejecting the process that council has adopted. Our staff asked for a chance to research and come back with a proper bylaw that was tailored to Norfolk and Haldimand, as we share a joint health unit. And we have worked in lockstep with them throughout the pandemic in all matters that affect the health of both municipalities. We didn't give them that. The public should have had a proper chance to provide input into something which affects each and every single member of our community in their everyday lives. We also didn't give them that. If staff hadn't written a delay into this bylaw, we weren't even going to be giving businesses that have already suffered enough time to prepare for such a significant change, especially if Councillor Taylor's amendment, which I do fully support and commend him for stepping up and doing the right thing to exempt employees. Norfolk County has been stocking up on PP&E for months, and even we wouldn't be ready to roll this out immediately today. In fact, if the staff recommendation to delay the implementation for businesses hadn't been accepted, I question how many councillors had arrived today with a mask in hand. It is also the same council that sits as the Board of Health that has consistently criticized Dr. Nessathari for not consulting enough with our Agricultural Advisory Board. And yet this is exactly what we have just done now to every citizen in Norfolk by not giving them that time. And I wholeheartedly reject the idea that a few additional days to have allowed for all of the above would have jeopardized the health of our communities, because that would be saying that we know more than our own medical officer of health. The medical officer of health who sat here and said that while he fully supports masks, that it was his preference that we first launch an education campaign and then revisit the issue in September. Because in a worst-case scenario, as we know, well, he retains the ability to immediately make an order at any time under Section 22 of the Health Protection and Promotion Act. It would also say to me that we believe that we know more than the provincial chief medical officer of health, and as well as the federal chief medical officer of health. But as someone who speaks with Shankar daily and sometimes twice a day, I can say that he has never once asked me to bring forward to council or to the Board of Health a bylaw to make masks mandatory at this stage in Norfolk County. He did ask me to support an education campaign, and he did ask me to consider making a bylaw a consideration in the fall. There is reason for notice of motion, and there is reason to debate motion. Sometimes there is good reason to act quickly, but rushing a bylaw through, as we've seen today, causes enormous problems. And in the words of Harry Schlang, making policy on the fly like we are doing today is not leadership. Taking a calculated approach would have been. As a result, because of our process on the matter is flawed, we've just now seen all the flaws in our own bylaw that was presented by staff because they had 4 hours to draft it. And again, Councillor Taylor, I really do commend you for stepping up and bringing forward the changes for the employees, because I said it at the beginning, and Councillor Martin, I respect your comments, but at the same time, I think sitting here, we too, as leaders of the community, could have demonstrated that we could all sit here like Councillor Rabbits and wear masks. But we have adopted this now. We are going to, focus on that education piece with our community. And, I know that there's two schools of thoughts with this, and I, too, was up all night long agonizing over this. I think I have grave concerns with this bylaw still, but I also, I understand the reasons that council is making this move as well, and the belief that we're protecting our community. So with that, I guess, do we want to take just a quick 5-minute break? The other item shouldn't take too long, but we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and finish the last item. The next item for discussion is Bylaw 20-67, it's a bylaw to authorize the execution of a mutual aid agreement with the Board of Health of the Windsor Essex Health Unit.
I'll start, and Ms. Miranda will follow. We've been approached by Windsor Essex to enter into a standard agreement. It's an agreement that's essentially drafted by the province. Mutual aid agreements you see in a lot of different municipal services, fire departments, police stations. It's really a process where if one of our neighbors or needs help, there's a set approach to providing help and then ensure that the payments from the provincial governments are flowed to each parties. So that's what's here. Everyone's read the news. Windsor, Essex is experiencing significant difficulties. Ms. Miranda and team have been on the phone with them probably daily since the start of the pandemic, exchanging knowledge and that sort of stuff. So this is formalizing a support measure. I would remind all the councillors that Norfolk County at one point in time received help from one of its neighbors, from one of its health units. And we did that without even a signed agreement. Our health unit picked up the phone to the Brant Health Unit when we needed to move 160 to quarantine 160 workers. With less than, well, within hours, they provided 7 public health nurses. So, you know, this is what we should be doing. This is a much more formal way of doing it. I apologize to council. You did receive some correspondence from ONA on the matter, but we'd be free to discuss that if required. But management is in support of helping fellow health units. If you want specific details on the type of help or any other questions, I'm sure Ms. Miranda can add to that or add any other comments that I've missed.
Through the chair to council, I have been reached out by the CEO of Windsor Essex. Originally, however, MEOC, which is the Ministry of Emergency Operations Center, the provincial emergency center, actually reached out to many health units, and over the on June the 28th, earlier this year, and many other health units are assisting Windsor Essex as they try to contain the multiple outbreaks that they currently are experiencing. Additionally, MEOC has sent a team down to Windsor Essex to assist them as they too are trying to accommodate hundreds of migrant farm workers and other clusters within their communities. And Ontario Health has also sent teams down to assist them. It is of our opinion that currently we are able to assist Windsor Essex. Our rolling count of cases is very minimal. We currently have, I think, about 6 positive cases in our community, and we do have the capacity to assist them. The assistance would be here at the health unit and would be done via phone. Our nurses would be assigned work associated with the outbreaks. So instead of following cases here within our jurisdictions, they would continue to follow cases within a different jurisdictions. Our nurses are skilled, they are trained and capable of doing this work. And as Mr. Burgess has suggested, when we were in need back in May and June, the Brant Health Unit came to our assistance. They, without question, provided me with 7 clinicians to assist us as we managed the farm outbreak. Without them, we would have not been able to have enough nurses to accommodate. So respectfully, I would ask that we assist our neighbors and our communities in our province to enable them to manage the outbreaks that they're currently managing.
Thanks, Marlene. Councillor Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you, I definitely love the idea of communities working collaboratively, and I think we should strive for that in all instances. My only concern with this is that we've just been, since March 13th, our nursing staff and our fellow colleagues have been on full steam ahead with this pandemic. and I don't doubt their qualifications and their capabilities of doing this work. My question is it in the best interest of our frontline staff to be taking on more? And just is it something that we need to maybe do a little bit more research on?
So through the chair to Councillor Huffman, I too agree that our nurses and all of our public health staff, and I'd say our county staff, have been working around the clock trying to manage COVID. This has been unprecedented for all, and we have all been affected in some way or the other. I can say, however, though, that we are going to a 5-day schedule next week. We are at a place right now that hopefully for at least a period of time, unless some other emergencies happen locally, that our public health staff will be going to 5 days a week versus the 7 that they have been working since sometime in late March, early April. So that'll, and we will have a response team available in the event that we do need to respond immediately. I can say that we did pause vacation, as did all of my colleagues in public health earlier in the spring, and we have since lifted that, and we have had our staff take vacation, and quite honestly, because our numbers are low, we've been encouraging vacation. Our staff currently in June, I think there was about 7 weeks of vacation that was taken by our nurses, not all of public health. We have approximately 30 nurses within the health unit. In July, they've taken in total about 20 weeks, and at present they have about another 20 weeks of vacation that they have planned. So short of another outbreak, we'll be able to enable them to get the very well-deserved time off to recoup and hopefully be prepared if we should enter into a second wave. I would like to say also that although their schedules have changed significantly during a pandemic, so have other county staffs and so have all of our partners across the province. Our staff did engage. We did change the schedule several times. I will say that although we were working in a 7-day schedule, we went to 4/10s, which enabled us to be able to work longer and enabled the nurses and all of the public health staff to have an additional 2 days off during a 2-week period to enable them to recoup and regenerate, as it was a very stressful time over the last few months. We then have gone and reduced their hours of work slowly as we've been enabled to, and we continue to do that and try to be flexible and nimble to continue to enable us to respond to any outbreaks and maintain containment. So respectfully, although all of our nurses and all of our other public health staff have endured a lot of hours, and I would say that applies to many businesses across our province and our nation, we have encouraged and we have tried very diligently to enable staff to, yes, work many hours, yes, work a lot of overtime, but also to take the well-deserved time off. Our nurses have demonstrated professionalism, leadership, and true dedication over the past several months, and I think stepping up now to assist our colleagues would be where I would like and recommend that we move forward with.
Councillor Huffman, go ahead.
Thank you. My follow-up was answered in Marlene's questions, or her statement. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Marlene. What is the status of the outbreak in Windsor-Essex? Do you have any statistics on their present numbers?
Through the chair to Councillor Martin, I don't have them currently today. When I spoke to the CEO, Ms. Teresa Minaret, I can never pronounce her name, and I will apologize for that. But anyways, last I understood, there were several hundred migrant farm workers. There were 5 migrant farm work outbreaks, one being a large outbreak of several hundred. They had another outbreak, as my understanding, in another manufacturing operation, and they had several clusters of outbreaks within their community that they were trying to manage. The cases continue to come in on a fairly daily basis in the double digits. I did not speak to her today, but I have spoken to her this week, and they continue to need support.
Thank you. Mayor Chop, if I may continue, I do have a couple of questions here. So would staff in their health unit be adopting a stronger program, something similar to what the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit is doing, or would our staff just simply be enforcing their existing programming?
So through the mayor to Councillor Martin, we would be adopting their process. However, the training that our nurses have is consistent across the health units in case management and wellness checks. So because their processes would be slightly different, no different than ours are with Brantford, we would have a quick orientation session with them, and then they would follow through with their procedure with their clinical expertise. And they would continue to be employees of the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit and would be compensated in keeping with what we are currently compensating all of the nurses within our health unit.
Thank you. And the capacity to assist right now, so our staff are going, they're starting to take their holidays and they're working less days. How can we anticipate that their workload would shift? Are they going to be back in a position where they're working considerable overtime hours, like in the throes of our own outbreak, or is it something that would be regularly scheduled and reliable and they'll know their set hours? How would that evolve?
So through the mayor to Councillor Martin, in speaking with Windsor-Essex, what we've agreed to is that we would work on a Monday to Friday schedule, no different than what we're moving to next week with our nurses respectfully. We would hope to train approximately 4 nurses so that we could rotate the nurses. At any point, as you've seen in the mutual aid agreement, we are not able to continue to assist due to our own local circumstances. We do have the ability to pull back as they do if they no longer require our assistance.
Thank you. And then my very last question, not that I don't trust your expertise, but how do our staff feel about this?
So through the mayor to Councillor Councillor Martin, my apologies. We have been trying to talk to ONA and through ONA and have reached out to our nurses about volunteering. There has been some concern about having time off and trying to gear up for programs that basically have not had a whole lot of attention over the last 4 weeks. However, we are in a pandemic. We are in an emergency. We are starting to do business continuity. We will be working towards starting some of our other priorities, such as vaccine clinics, to catch up from the work that was not enabled over the last several months, and other priorities across the health unit. However, respectfully, our main priority is COVID. Our main priority is to continue to assist and to manage the COVID and containment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Marlene. Just for clarification, the support that we would provide Windsor-Essex would be in the form of telephone and I'm assuming online communications with them. It would not require field visits or site attendance?
Through the mayor, that is correct. All of the work that's being requested at this point in time would be done here within our office and would be done via telephone or some type of email, electronic technology.
Thank you.
A couple questions here. Are other municipalities, other health units contributing also, similar to what Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit would be?
So through the mayor, they are. The call for help actually came on June the 28th, and several health units have stepped up, and they are assisting, and they require more assistance. So we are recommending, again, that we also assist. Instead of 1 or 2 health units providing many nurses or clinicians to assist, if everybody contributes a handful or 1 or 2 nurses that strongly supports, and then we share the wealth across the province or across the southwestern region.
And second question here, can you bring us up to speed on where we are in the Haldeman Norfolk area with respect to COVID and any outbreaks of that nature that are potentially need addressing?
So we currently have had, I believe, 6 cases in the last couple of weeks. We were very fortunate. In late June and early July, we went over 2 weeks, I think it was about 18 days, with no positive cases, which was well received. We do have about 6 cases. We do have about 5 cases that we're doing contact tracing on right now, and we have asked and have assigned for nurses to do the follow-up with the contact tracing and to follow up the current cases. So that is what we're currently working on. So approximately 6 positives at this point.
Thank you.
Further questions? Somebody wish to move the staff recommendation, or rather, sorry, not. To approve bylaw 20-67. Mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Taylor and seconded by Councillor Rabbits. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? And that's carried. And one final bylaw, which is on the changes to the agenda. Oh, we did it right then. Okay, that's right. Thanks. Okay, in that case, I have a motion moved by Councillor Huffman and seconded by Councillor Rabbits that bylaw 2020-68 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special council held on July 24, 2020 be approved, signed by the mayor and clerk and affixed with the corporate seal. All those in favor? And finally, that council be adjourned at 12:59 p.m. Moved by Councillor Rabbits, seconded by Councillor Huffman. All those in favor? And that's carried. Council's adjourned. See you on the 18th.